Hello and welcome to In the Studio. I'm Dr. Daniel Rockers, your host for this program. The topic this evening is psychology on aging and the positive role that psychologists play in the aging process. We've got several experts here tonight on geropsychology or geriatric psychology, and we also have a legislator here. I'd like to introduce our guests tonight. Assemblymember Mariko Yamada is the current chair on the Assembly Committee on Aging and Long-Term Care. Assemblymember Yamada has a degree in psychology as well as social work, and she's currently conducting an informational series called The Faces of Aging, which explores California's rapidly aging population and its increasing diversity. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
We've got Dr. Irving Hellman, who is an expert in geropsychology, and he specializes in forensic and advocacy for the aging population. Dr. Hellman is an advisor on elder abuse and neglect, and he has founded several teams to help the aging population, including the Sacramento Financial Abuse Specialist team. Finally, we've got Dr. Patricia Bach. Dr. Bach is a nurse and psychologist of more than 30 years. She currently serves as president of the Psychologists in LongTerm Care. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's start off. Assemblymember Yamada. For a little background, I've heard the term silver tsunami. Can you say a little bit about what is that and what does that mean?
Sure. The silver tsunami is a term that has been coined in fairly recent time to describe the demographic shift that our state and nation are seeing. Every day, 10,000 people turn 65 in our country, and California is already home to the largest number of older adults. 5 million in California are already age 65, and in about 20 years, a full 20% or 1 in 5 Californians will be age 65. So this is the term that is used to describe the rapidly aging population that we are going to be required to serve and should serve. Frankly, I don't think we're quite ready.
So in what way is that going to cause some sort of burden on our current health system, or what difference is it going to make, or what's the problem?
Well, clearly there will be challenges at all levels, not only in terms of income security. I think that's part of what the big debate is about retirement costs and whether jurisdictions can continue to afford to pay health care, for example, for its retirees. It will also affect medical services, social services, transportation, housing, you name it. It's going to affect every aspect of life, including, I think, one that we don't discuss often enough, and that's caregiving. Caregiving is going to become front and center. If you haven't already experienced being a caregiver, I believe Rosalind Carter has that famous quote about there are 4 kinds of people in the world. You're either giving care, getting care, or will need to give care or get care. So if you haven't dealt with it yet, stay tuned. You're going to see it very soon in your families.
I see that in my practice actually quite a bit. I have clients come in who are trying to hold down a full-time job, maybe take care of a family, and at the same time take care of an aging adult or parent. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's pretty difficult.
It is, and I think the descriptor that has been used quite often for that generation of people who are experiencing both caring for an aging parent and maybe their own children is the sandwich generation. But I think what I like to call it now is the triple-decker club sandwich, because there are so many people living into older age. The fastest growing cohort is 85 to 100. And so that one sort of working adult, if they're lucky enough to still keep their jobs, are not only managing their parents, sometimes the grandparents, and sometimes the children, or sometimes the grandchildren. So caregiving is shifting in its focus, And we are going to have to come to grips with that, not only as a state, but as a nation.
So that ends up, like I said, in my practice, I see people having a lot of problems with that, and that's can be very stressful to take on this added burden in an already pretty busy world. Dr. Bach, can you speak about that? What can you say about this sort of stress that people have, and how do they work with that?
I think it's probably one of the most underestimated factors that we're dealing with at this point in terms of the silver tsunami, all of the changes that we're seeing with the increasing numbers of folks diagnosed with a dementing illness or a progressive neurological disease. Caregivers, as Assemblywoman Yamada described, are in between caring for their parents, grandparents, other relatives, or significant others, as well as their children, their grandchildren, etc. So there are lots of issues on the table that they need to bear in mind. And as you said, they need to maintain a full-time job in many cases, just deal with the activities of daily living that they themselves have need for, as well as the increasing developmental needs that come up with a relative or a person who needs additional care and support and facilitation. Unfortunately, one of the major issues with this is that I think there is still a lot of work that can be done in terms of reimbursement for services provided by the family member, or resources that really need to be generated and made available to caregivers individually and at large in the community, so that they do have the social support, the financial support, the community support that they really need to be able to maintain their lives in a sense of balance that they had prior to a family member needing additional care. Unfortunately, the statistics do suggest that caregiver stress can be so extreme that it can actually shorten the life of the caregiver.
Is the caregiver stress, is that more difficult because it's a relative? I mean, does that, like, if I see my mother going downhill or having dementia or some problems, is it more stressful? I mean, it sounds like maybe it's a no-brainer.
I believe that can certainly play a large role in it, to be quite honest with you. Needing to bear witness to the slow decline of dementia or dementing illnesses or progressive neurological diseases has to be done on a daily basis. It's very difficult to do that and still maintain the relationship as it was prior to the onset of that dementing illness or that disease.
And we're going to get to that in just a moment here. Is there, Dr. Hellman?
In my experience, I see the physical toll that caregiving takes on the caregiver, who can be a spouse first and then children after that, being so great that generally what ends up happening is that the caregiver gets ill, can't provide the care anymore, which is actually physically burdensome, and can throw their sleep cycle out. And when they can't do it anymore, then the elder who needs care ends up moving to a higher level of care. And most people that are getting old would prefer to age in place.
I'd like to hit that at the end of the program there. That's a very good point. Or maybe not, maybe right now. What is aging in place? Aging
in place is staying where you live as long as you possibly can, bringing in assistive devices and helpers to make it possible for you to stay there as long as possible. People are discouraged both from internally and the system from having to move to a higher level of care, because it's more expensive, it's more uncomfortable, it's not familiar, and generally people feel more comfortable with the care that they get from a family member that they can trust than from others who are unfamiliar to them.
So is this more a way of trying to relieve the burden from the system, or is it helping people out?
It's just the natural flow of events in people's lives. It's always happened, and because the system, our system isn't set up to provide the kind of financial resources and the systems necessary to provide that care, people are doing it on their own. A fact is that most people spend more time caregiving in a lifetime than they do raising their children. And the burden of that care generally is on the women in the family
So when you say caregiving, you mean caregiving for one's elders?
for one's elders. First the spouse, then the parents. First the spouse is providing the care, and then when the spouse can no longer do it, the children jump in and do it.
So that, and say that again, they spend more time caregiving than raising their
Caregiving than
children.
raising children, because if you're a child of elders like people my generation, the baby boomers, we first have the burden of caring for our parents, and then we might have the burden of caring for a spouse. So you spend twice the amount of time doing that caregiving.
Now, in this whole process there, is that where your specialization is elder care abuse and that sort of thing? In that process, is that where some of the problems come in, or how does, what your focus is, how does that fit into that?
50%. I've gotten involved in elder abuse because I was a forensic psychologist, and there was a need for people in the legal arena as psychologists to provide expertise to how this could happen and to protect people from others. And so elders who are being cared for tend to be vulnerable. And so elder abuse is a crime of opportunity that's generally committed by a family member, usually one that is not necessarily on the best terms with the elder. And so as the opportunity arises, that vulnerable elder might be taken advantage of financially, and then later physically possibly. And certainly the biggest problem in elder abuse are actually elders who are isolated, who have no caregiver, which is a whole other problem, people who don't have caregivers in their families. And so as they become isolated in their vulnerabilities, they start to neglect their own personal needs. They stop eating correctly, they stop taking their medications, they stop taking care of themselves and dressing and bathing, and soon you have quite a problem that only the eyes of some of the public officials can participate in and intervene in.
Okay. Assemblymember Yamada.
Yeah, I had a comment about that. You know, the state's largest long-term care and in-home supportive services system is now about 440,000 in California. There are 440,000 frankly impoverished seniors that qualify for the in-home supportive services program. It's one of the largest in the nation. I think it was the first in the nation in California. I think it is an excellent program conceptually. I think our caregivers, our providers of these very vital social services to those who wish to remain independent in their own homes for as long as possible has to be strengthened rather than eliminated or reduced, as we are seeing in the current governor's budget. There is a proposal to cap the hours to 40 hours a week. And this will have disastrous effects on all of the recipients of these valuable services, in my opinion. But, you know, the national response to the need to address long-term care in the home was led by the Lion of the Senate, that was Senator Ted Kennedy, who had the Class Act as part of the Affordable Care Act. Regrettably, that was eliminated as part of the final agreement on affordable care. And we are going to have to, as a nation and certainly as a state, again, readdress the long-term care and caregiving issue. I think it is really the cornerstone of all of the services that we will need. It's going to be a constellation of services that will need to be addressed to keep people safe and healthy in their own homes as long as possible.
The you know, it seems like more and more what we see, or at least from my point of view, is there's so much medication being prescribed for everything. Is that one of those things, or where does medication fit into all this?
Well, not being a medical doctor, but a social worker, you know, I think perhaps my view of medication may be slightly different than those of my colleagues in the medical profession. But we all know the problem of polypharmacy. There,
Define that
well,
maybe for the
those are
audience.
multiple medications that an individual is taking. So poly just meaning, lots or
Yeah,
many.
I have some
many.
clients who come in who have 10, 15,
Absolutely.
a list of 10 or 15 maybe 20 meds.
Medications. I can recall taking some residents to a doctor's visit with a bag full of their medicines, again, sometimes 10, 15 medicines. And I think really the goal should be to reduce the numbers of medications that anyone should have to take. There are certainly medications that are important and life-saving, but I think there may be a tendency to prescribe first, without necessarily knowing all the other effects that could take place by having too many medications. And so I think that is something that we need to look at. Not only in the home setting, but certainly in institutional settings as well.
In both places.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bach, you are, I can't remember the name of the group you're president of.
Psychologist in long-term care.
Psychologist long-term care. What's the stance as far as medications, and where are we going with that from a psychologist's point of view?
Well, one of the things that I think we bring to the table as psychologists and as mental health providers from other professions is the opportunity to utilize behavioral interventions to mitigate the behavioral presentation that you see, for example, in dementing illnesses. In many cases, patients are prescribed antipsychotics, and Medicare has a mandate which requires physicians and other providers who prescribing providers to minimize the percentage of antipsychotics by 15%. And it was not met at its precise level, but there's work being done in that area. But as psychologists, I think we all feel, and clinical social workers, I feel that we bring to the table time, which is a very critical issue. Spending time, more than 15 minutes with somebody, is a very important and salient aspect of the services that we provide. And also knowledge and expertise in terms of how we utilize behavioral changes, patterns, modifying the environment, modifying the stimuli, modifying how we speak to folks or speak with folks, trying to maximize the not decision-making capacity, but their right to choose what they want. I think all of these are really important issues in terms of medication.
Working with a person.
Right, person-centered care based on research, evidence-based research, providing mental health services, behavioral changes, behavioral interventions. And as a group of psychologists, we don't have really anything to do in terms of prescribing medications, although
Right.
we do understand that there are interactions. Polypharmacy is a big issue, and in concert with polypharmacy, the presentation of dementia with difficulties with executive function, judgment, memory, etc., often contributes to polypharmacy issues. So when you both were speaking about folks that are marginalized who are not being cared for by a family member or someone else to monitor what they're doing, this is really a significant issue where we think we can make a difference.
So let's, for the viewers, what is executive functions?
Oh,
What
the
does that
ability
mean?
to make decisions, to have abstract judgment, to understand the ramifications of decisions that are made, to plan things, to execute a plan.
Okay, and then is that what happens when people have dementia? Is that a definition of dementia?
No, it's not. It's a component of a dementing process, and there are many different types of dementia. It becomes more prevalent in, for example, the dementia that in some cases accompanies Parkinson's disease or vascular dementia. So executive function and judgment abilities are more impaired in those kinds of dementing illnesses than, for example, Alzheimer's, where the hallmark of Alzheimer's
Right.
disease is memory impairment.
Okay. Dr. Hellman?
Actually, the three functions that are the highest probability ones to diminish for Alzheimer's disease, as well as most of the other dementia, are memory. All dementia requires a problem with memory, And the problem is remembering new things, such as what you had in the morning for breakfast, what the date is today, who visited you today, what someone's name is when they introduce themselves to you. And I know I have a problem with that, and I don't have Alzheimer's yet, but this is a more rapid type of forgetting than the one that's typically common for all of us as we get older. And so memory problem is one, and then at least one other functional problem in cognition, and the highest probability one actually is executive dysfunction with Alzheimer's disease. In addition, with Alzheimer's disease, you get an additional variation in verbal fluidity and the ability to recall what things are called, words from memory, and it's the tip of the tongue experience that people have only on a severe level, where maybe you and I might forget someone's name and forget a word once in a while. Someone with Alzheimer's disease would forget what something like a car is called, or the name of a visitor and or of a grandchild, and they speak in a difficult sort of staggered way because they're having difficulty retrieving the words for things.
Okay. So dementia, is this what, are we all destined for that? Or if my grandparents had that, am I going to get that? What's the real story here?
Well, Alzheimer's there's only one type of Alzheimer's. It's highly hereditable, and that is early Alzheimer's, which is very rare, and it strikes people in their 50s, and by the time they're 60, most of them will die of it. So that's not the typical one that most people are familiar with. That's the one that comes on later in the 60s, in the 70s, and by the time the population reaches 85, close to 50% may have the beginning of Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's itself is a long progressive disease that most people will die of something else. So that's the good news.
That's the good news.
Right.
All right. So there's a little bit of good news here about the whole aging process.
Yeah.
All right. So, there's more.
And there's just not, the risk is only if you live to be 85 and older, and the median age right now is 83. So the chances are that something else will get
some bad news here at the end?
I'm just saying that with the good news of living longer, we also have greater risk of dementing process in those last 15 years.
Okay, but the good news, we're going to have to wrap up here. So some good news is?
The good news is most people don't get dementia, and most people don't end up in nursing homes.
Okay, very good. Assemblymember Yamada?
Well, I first want to just thank you all for this opportunity to engage this evening. This is such a rich topic area, and there is a lot of good news, because not only in our country, but in countries around the world, especially Japan, where I think 33% of their country is going to be 65 years of age and over very soon. There are lots of new technologies, lots of new innovative ways to address aging in place, and making long life really is something to look forward to, not something to fear. So thank you very much.
Very good. And Dr. Bach, what do you have? Something good, I hope?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you to Assemblywoman Yamada for being a champion for those of us who are aging, and even folks that are beyond our age. I mean, we really value all the work you've done to support the elderly, the older folks. I think the good news is that there is a developmental continuum that we're all aware of, that we all have changes as we age. I think a positive attitude, trying to have a good social support system, trying to laugh, find something good that happens every day. We don't have to give up everything because of the possibility of decline, as we have the opportunity to be in charge of ourselves, to have good relationships with our families, and to make the best of every day. And I think that's where we as psychologists and clinical social workers can come in and really help folks see the bright light at what sometimes might be the end of the tunnel.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming here. And so where can the audience get more information? We've got several websites that we've got here. And beginning with the Pioneer Network, we've got the Pioneer Network, we've got the Alzheimer's Association, and then finally the Caregiver Magazine. Finally, contact information for each of the presenters, which I thank you for being here. We've got Assemblymember Yamada. We've got your website up there. And Dr. Hellman, we've got your website up there, the ElderCareAdvisor.com. And Dr. Bach, your telephone number is there, and of course my telephone number is there too if anybody wants to call. So, thank you for watching, and this was In the Studio.